of California DBA team. I'd like to warmly welcome everyone who's in for the retailing webinar, as we call it, retailing in the new normal. Now, the significance of retailing is such that it has touched so many lives. Just imagine, from the farmer who grows crop and gives to the manufacturer manufactures, distributes, it reaches the distributor, the retailer, and the consumer. Just imagine how many lives this industry is touching upon. And that is why we have a very high significance. This industry is very significant towards any country's economy. Retailing is a very important element to any economy because it has the power to touch so many lives. So today, University of California DBA team is proud to have a very insightful panel of experts who are going to take us through retailing in new normal. As you all know, we've been faced up with a pandemic situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, and we will today therefore be looking at how retail copes in the new normal environment. So my first panelist comes from a diverse background. He's a general manager sales of Chevron Lubricants. He's also a doctoral candidate at University of California. He has over 25 years of managerial experience in the fast-moving consumer goods industry, as well as in related other industries. It's my privilege to invite my first panelist on board, Mr. Bertram Paul, into this discussion. Welcome, Bertram.
Thank you, Oshan.
So, Bertram, today, in retailing context, we are faced up with a challenge. But before we move on to the challenge, what I would like to ask from you is, Bertram, retailing is such an interesting area that it keeps adding value to a product until it reaches the hands of the consumer. It's such a value added process of selling a product to a market. In that light, how has retail been operating prior to this COVID-19 pandemic? What has been the operating mechanism, the governing mechanism as an industry?
Yeah, sure, Oshan. First of all, I'd like to thank the University of California for inviting me to be part of this webinar. And as you rightly said, Oshan, retail is an industry that touches everyone. I think it's very familiar to everyone since all of us are part of it in terms of the fact that we are all consumers of retail. Now, when you talk of retail, generally there is a perception that it is, say, mainly FMCG, for example, but actually it is a lot more than that. And if you look at just the importance of retail to Sri Lanka, you'll actually find that it is retailing in all its forms accounts for about 34% of our GDP. It accounts for about 14% of all employment in the country. And in terms of footfall, annual footfall, it's over 250 million footfall per annum. So that's how important and significant retailing is. And if you look at the various sectors that are considered part of retail, there's obviously FMCG. But in addition, you have, say, clothing, you have fashion and jewelry, accessories, you have shelter and housing, you have electronics and household appliances, furniture, the whole white goods sector, you have footwear and accessories, healthcare and wellness, the say pharmacies, gymnasiums, opticians, all of that is also part of retail, and even entertainment, cinemas, theaters, bookstores, chains and restaurants, all of them are part of retail. So in that sense, it's certainly a very significant contributor to the overall economy. And you were asking about the kind of model that operated. If I look at, say, the overall performance in Sri Lanka, if you just look at 2019, it's been a bit of a struggle because overall, if you look at the services sector itself, we grew around between 2 to kind of 3.7% has been the growth every single quarter, except for the last quarter in the Q2 in 2019, as you know, with the Easter attacks, the growth crashed to about 0.7%. So that's pretty much how the sector has performed. And if you look at online retailing, it's actually a very small component. It's under 2%. But interestingly, it's got a growth rate of over 100% year on year. So that's a good indicator. Now, if you just look at the FMCG sector, you have the two areas which we call general trade and modern trade. And it's got a ratio of about 80-20, so 80% being general trade. So you're looking at about 270,000 outlets in general trade. If you look at modern trade, you've got about 2,000 in total, which is about 950 large format, comprising of the 7 main retail chains, and about 1,000 of what we call SMMT, or the small and medium modern trade. Again, if you look at the makeup of the general trade, 66% is actually rural, and only 34% is urban. Of course, it is rather different when you look at the population, because the population is more like an 80-18 split, so which means that urban sector is actually punching higher and therefore accounts for a higher basket value. If you look at the composition of FMCG, typically the F&B sector, or food and beverage sector, is about 70%. Personal care is about 20%, household care is about 8%, and OTC, or over-the-counter, makes up about 2%. If you look at the main categories, I think about the total top 10 categories actually contribute about 70% of FMCG in terms of value. And the major categories, if I just talk about the top 4, are biscuits, soft drinks, milk powder, and toilet soap. So they are the big players. Unilever as a company leads the FMCG space. They have the largest amount of sales as well as the biggest outlet penetration. In terms of trends, one thing you see is 25% of the population actually purchases goods from semi-wholesalers. And the reason for that is because these wholesalers actually offer discounts to the consumers as opposed to the market price. In terms of the Western province, it's the highest contributor to total FMCG. It counts for about 30%. And the Northern province is the lowest contributor at around 3%. So if you talk about online, which is probably my last point I'll make before I pass on to you, the proportion of online sales is actually minuscule. In modern trade, it was about 0.1%, but of course this was before the COVID-19 pandemic came.
Thank you very much, Bertram. So that was very insightful how you explained the market structure, the contribution of different channels towards the total market. For example, online sales proportion, that you have brought in the proportion, the 80-20 split of general trade and modern trade. So some interesting stats about the market. So the next panelist that I have on board has exposure to both the modern trade as well as general trade, and he has been engaged not only in the market side but also in the supply chain aspect of it. He is the CEO of Chief Executive Officer of PE Plus Private Limited. He's also the Executive of the Year for the Capital Maharaja organization in year 2015, and he is a doctoral candidate at University of Kalanites. And my next panel is none other than Mr. Sumit Kumar Dandunage. Welcome, Sumit, to the panel, and thank you for accepting our invitation. I think you're on mute. Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah. Nearly 1/3 of Sri Lankan GDP with sales value exceeding 30 billion is comprised of the activities directly retail businesses, and explains 2 frontline employees are engaging with these businesses. So these businesses is a large business in Sri Lanka right now. It consists of number of industries. Simply say it's FMCG industries, clothing and fashion industries, shelter and housing, household and domestic durable articles industries, footwear industries, e-commerce, mobility like automobiles and all, healthcare industries. All these consist of retail businesses. But I wish to discuss about the operations and upstream supplier point of view, since Bertram will address the downstream customers such as retailers and all. In this two paradigm, operations and upstream suppliers, we do have two business models. One is called trading, one is called manufacturing. All these above sub business of retail businesses, we can divide into two models. When the trading point of view, we have to assign our suppliers, but in this competitive environment, we don't call them as a supplier, since we need to have a strategic partner. In this trading businesses, we have two kinds of trading businesses. One is raw material like commodities, one is finished products. All these retail businesses available in the products coming from the manufacturing or trading arms. Why we assign strategic partners? Since once the problem comes, we together can find the solution to meet the challenges. That's what we assign strategic partners. Under trading, we have a number of challenges: online delivery, consistent quality, competitive price, new design and models. Under the manufacturing model, same parameters will apply. But for that, we don't have strategic partner from supply sides. Individually, we have to handle all these challenges. For that, as a manufacturer, we used to use lean manufacturing practice, agile manufacturing, dynamic capabilities to meet the retail requirement. In the before the pandemic situations, traditionally we use all physical meetings, supplier visit, distributor visit, customer visit, and so on. So all these traditional work only we practices. After meeting these kind of pandemic situations only, we open our eyes. Since this kind of experience we don't have experience before, but in this our career, we have experienced two turbulences. One 2008-9, that is economic turbulences. Second economic turbulence in these pandemic situations. That's how we behave in this industry before the COVID-19.
Thank you, Sumit. So from what I got from you is that traditionally you have played a lot of emphasis on relationship building with your strategic partners, and also a lot of inputs gone into supplier relations. So listening to Bertram and Sumit, what I understand is the market conditions as well as organizations' internal capabilities put together contributes a lot towards the growth of this sector. Now, someone managing all of these the dimensions would ideally be an entrepreneur, right? So my next panelist is an expert in that area. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Sunshine Medical Care. He's also a doctoral student as well. And he is a very seasoned management professional. It's none other than Mr. T.Sayandhan. Welcome, Sayandhan, to our discussion, and thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thanks, Oshan. Thanks for having me there.
Sayandhan, now I know your pet area is entrepreneurship. So I'd like to pose a question from that itself. Now, prior to this pandemic, how do you see the mindset of a typical retailing entrepreneur work in the context in Sri Lanka? What was their mindset towards retailing?
Okay. So, Oshan, if you take the entrepreneurs per se, the statistics from the Sri Lanka Ministry of Industry and Commerce say that 75% of all entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka fall into the SME category. Now, this is something that we need to digest. Most of them are in the SME category, and they contribute 52% of the GDP and 45% of the employment. But here comes the alarm for Sri Lanka. The labor statistics suggest that we badly need like 5-fold increase in entrepreneurs, because if you take the entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka, that accounts only for 2.8%. And if you compare these figures to some of the regional countries like Thailand, they have about 27.5% of entrepreneurs. If you take Vietnam, it's 19.6. If you take Indonesia, it's 15.3. And even countries like Bangladesh is at 11.6. So Sri Lanka, there's a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs, and it's just at 2.8 as per the latest statistics from the Labor Statistics Department. So largely when I speak of entrepreneurs today, I'm speaking of people like who are trading, who do buying and selling. I'm talking of barbers and beauticians. I'm talking of teachers and tuition masters. I'm talking of cameramen and media personnel, hoteliers, etc. So if you take this category, pre-COVID, I would say people took things for granted. Now, what do you mean by took things for granted is they worked in a very comfortable environment because they had their own customers and clients. So they were not sure what's going to be my income or what's going to be my revenue. They knew their cost structure. They knew their return on investment. They knew where the cash was coming. So this was the environment how an entrepreneur operated in a pre-COVID environment. Let's see whether the COVID-19 can bring more entrepreneurs to Sri Lanka, and that would be my answer on a pre-COVID area, Usha.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sayandhan, for that insightful information. So from what I captured from Sayandhan's conversation is that we have been conventionally thinking a little complacently, if I'm not mistaken. So the next panelist in my forum is someone who's very optimistic about innovations, about bringing in technology, about a lot of things. So he's a tech entrepreneur. He's a CEO and founder of Silverleaf Technologies. He's also a learning partner, a doctoral student at the University of Kelaniya. And it's none other than Mr. Dushi Tilevasan. Welcome, Dushi, to the forum.
Thanks for the interesting introduction.
Cheers. Dushi, my first question is revolved around innovation, sort of. So how do you think pre-COVID, what was the approach of Sri Lankan retailers towards innovation? Now, when I say innovation, it's just a broad innovation. Like a lot of people think technology-based innovation is innovation, but not really, isn't it? Innovation is a much broader area. How did Sri Lankan retailers thought of innovation pre-COVID?
Okay, Ushan, let me take a step back and try and put the whole retail, the idea of retail in context, right? So kind of everybody will get a picture of where we started and where we are now and where we are going to go, right? So if you look at retail or retail or trading per se, as Bert very clearly said, it is one of the most important function of humankind, right? Which existed even during the early days of civilization. In fact, there is proof that in ancient China, families used to have branding to brand their product to be unique, right? So if you look at the 13th century Europe, in fact, the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, which was built in 1455, still exists, right? And that's how far we go back, right? So retail got a major boost after the first industrial revolution, right? That was probably the some of the things that you are seeing today, the way shops are arranged, the way the traditional retail that we see in the villages or probably in the small towns, got established after the first the structure got established after the first industrial revolution, right, and the birth of the cities. So during the early days, transportation, I mean, I would consider transport as a technology as well, which allowed people to come into towns using, say, steam bicycles and all that. So that gave the idea of the structure of the shop, how they design the shop, the windows, and how consumers come in and walk into the shop. Things like that actually got improved during this period. So the first grand shopping arcades were probably built around the 18th century, which is actually sort of a precursor to the modern day shopping malls, right? And in that time, the concept of window shopping came into play. So you get the poor people or the low income earners come and see the stuff, right? So the first department stores started appearing in the US in the 19th century. So this is actually all about the technology innovation that happened around the human society, from transportation, easy transportation, easy access to places, increasing wealth, the move from rural to urban societies. All this contributed. The real technical innovation of what probably the audience will consider technical happened in the 1920s by way of introduction of the credit or the charge cards, right? That gave a massive boost to the retail industry in the US, right? The credit card, as you know, had evolved from that period. And then the first large shopping malls took shape in the 1950s, and the first electronic cash register came into play in the 1960s, right? And then you get the birth of Walmart in 1962. I'm taking the example of Walmart as that's one of the world's largest retailers, and most people know what Walmart is. And then in 1974, the introduction of the barcode, which completely revolutionized how inventory worked. And that really changed how retail sort of moved forward. Fast forward 1994, Amazon came into play as the first online retailer. Then 1995, eBay with the concept of zero marginal cost society. And on the retailing moved from the physical world to the cyber world. And in 2015, Amazon became the largest retailer, even beating Walmart. Right? Now, if you look at Sri Lanka, we have all seen how retail has moved. You saw from the first mom and pop shops to the first modern trade in the late 80s. And we get the first online shops in the late 1990s, like places like Avakasa Kade, Kapruka, then Singer. These people all came online, but they were kind of catering to a market. It was actually interesting because I was in the industry at that time. Avakasa Kade was selling refrigerators and all that stuff. So there are people who were buying, the people who were living in the Middle East were buying refrigerators to people who are living in Sri Lanka. So there was a use case, right? And the change started happening. And then recently you saw the birth of what they term as the local commerce players. So you observe, apart from the larger online players like Daraz and Wow, there are these small regional players who are catering to a specific community, which are with a small application, who actually I see have probably learned the model and shaped the model before COVID, and who were probably very successful during this period. And these people are not known to the mass because they operate in a very low scale. I can give you plenty of examples between Colombo 1 and Colombo 15. And even in some other regions, like even in the north, I can give a few examples people who have done this, right? So there are, as Sayandhan said, there are entrepreneurs who are one or two people who have a small app, but then they deliver goods. We have these things. We have this kind of environment that was there. And probably I would say that who have learned post-COVID and were probably very successful during COVID. And again, players like Daraz, who are backed by Alibaba, who's going to be a major threat to the local players in the future. So that's my take on this.
Thank you, Rishi, for all the insights. So, if I take a step back and look at what each of you have told, see, Bert has scanned the existing market, Bertram, and he has clearly identified the major components in the market. And if I take Sumit, he has identified clearly how the operating structure of an organization works towards in retail, how it works. And also, if I take from Sayandhan, he has clearly understood that Sri Lanka has a shortage of entrepreneurs, and it's a point that needs serious consideration. And Dushi says innovation has happened. It's not just technology based, it has been the evolution, and time to time there have been revolutions. So it has taken a journey, but today with this pandemic, things are beginning to change with local commerce coming in. So my next question goes to someone who knows the pulse of the market really well, and that's Bertram. So Bertram, my next question is, now, given what has happened with COVID-19 pandemic, do you see, we obviously see customers, traditionally they used to go to the store to buy stuff, but today the store is arranging home deliveries. Do you see things changing in the market condition with COVID-19 at this present moment? Do you see any more changes other than that? And if so, to what extent they are changing is my next question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Oshan. So it was an obvious, change that we saw, especially if you take, say, the supermarket industry, where we found that, because the outlets were closed, people couldn't get out. So therefore, the outlets were really forced to, look at taking orders through online or phone or WhatsApp, and then they started, deliveries. So in fact, I think a study that was done by consultants actually said that online purchasing can actually increase by about close to 40%, 38% if I remember right. But interestingly, from after the after the Sinhala Urdu period, the curfew was relaxed in the outer districts, and even in the Western province from early May, we've had curfew being relaxed. And what you see is that consumers have actually gone back to where they were pre-COVID. So although in, say, if I take the modern trade, as I said, online ordering was pretty much around 0.1%. It increased to virtually, a significant percentage, virtually 100%, because there was no people walking into supermarkets during the shutdown. But now what you see is that consumers have come back. There was a lot of talk about, with people getting used to online, this is going to continue. We haven't seen that. Right, so that's an interesting situation. But if you look at your other question in terms of what have been the impacts of COVID-19 on the retailing industry, see, the biggest issue that we face is that there has been a 2.5 month shutdown for most outlets, right? Except for people who are in certain essential services, or who are allowed in, say, agri and fisheries industries. For most, particularly in the Western province and in the lockdown areas, they've been closed for 2.5 months. That's had a tremendous impact on cash flow, and that is really the biggest issue. Liquidity has become a killer right now, right? Particularly adverse for those who had long credit periods to the trade. Also, SMEs who are, or even I would say even large companies who are highly geared, are in deep trouble because cash flow has become a serious issue. In fact, you have a situation now where some companies are actually getting their sales force to focus on collecting debts instead of selling. In fact, they are curtailing the sales as a means of collecting money. So this has become a huge issue. Return checks from the trade, inability to pay suppliers, essentially due to the disruption of cash flow. If you look at longer term, one of the things that you see is, or I would say probably more medium term, reduced disposable income for consumers. You see the issue with pay cuts. Companies are, getting the employees to pay salary cuts. We see layoffs happening, particularly in industries such as, tourism, in the apparel sector. You see this. This is definitely going to have an adverse impact on retail. You look at, and when you say tourism, it is not just directly the hotels and the hospitality as such. Even the whole ecosystem, the suppliers who, supply into tourists, into the hotels, the guys who do transportation of tourists, all of this, their incomes have been curtailed, and therefore there is going to be a significant impact on disposable income. You take the construction sector, we are in deep trouble. And again, I'm sorry to say, but the government, I think, is one of the biggest, culprits in this, because there is, I think the government owes 50 billion rupees to the Sri Lankan construction sector for projects which have already been completed. So this again means that they are unable to pay their subcontractors, who are unable to pay their suppliers. So this is going to be a serious issue for consumption. The other issue with the pandemic that we saw is, yes, lots of people were working from home, but working from home only works for knowledge workers. It does not work for daily wage earners or people in the informal sector. So these people have lost incomes, and that's affecting retail. Ultimately, we are looking at competing for a shrinking wallet, and that's the biggest issue. See, consumers are going to really prioritize or differently, because you could see that when their incomes are curtailed, the priorities goes more to food and also to say children's education. So non-essentials essentially take a hit, and that's something that we are seeing as an impact. Immediate impact we see because of the adverse foreign reserve situation that Sri Lanka is going through. There is a ban on imports. It's for so many categories like mobile phones, motor vehicles, tires and tubes and all of that, right? So they've said 3 months, but speculation in the market is that this will probably go until end of the year. But even over the next 3 months, it's certainly going to affect the operation of even retailers of electronics, for example, right? Even supermarkets are going to have an issue because their imported portfolio of products is going to be affected. Another issue with the foreign reserves we are seeing is that the government is actually restricting open account imports. They're actually pressurizing importers to move to 90 days credit. So unless your suppliers agree to this, you're going to have challenges going forward. And then, of course, in terms of the issues from the pandemic, now after the lockdowns were lifted, there is a need for safe operations in compliance with the government guidelines. There is a need to consider the health and safety of not only employees but customers. And you see retailers, coping with this. I would say they are setting up, decent procedures to try and battle this. But there's always the whole uncertainty of returning to another lockdown. You take Singapore, for example. Singapore relaxed the whole, lockdown situation, and there was a second wave, and then they went back into lockdown. Who knows what will happen in the US after all this, riots and the protests over Black Lives Matter? And there might easily be another wave of COVID-19. So there is this speculation even here as to what happens, say, after an election, for example, right? So that's another uncertainty. And then there's also various, possibilities of further disruptions of other areas. The UN World Food Program has warned about possible famine that could take place. Right, there's this whole issue of locusts affecting agricultural crops in Africa and even South Asia. So these are all looming on the horizon. So yes, we've been through a crisis and it's leaving an impact on us, but it's also brought several other challenges which retailers need to cope with going forward, Oshan.
Thank you very much, Bertram. So from what I understand is overall in the current context, starting from an individual level to an organizational level and to a level, so to a certain extent to even the government is having a cash flow issue. So in these trying circumstances, we have to still get going, but the going is not easy. It's challenging. So in this challenging environment, how do you see organizations reimagining a future and realigning and re-establishing itself to this challenge? My question goes to Sumit.
Yeah, Oshan, before that, I want to tell something about the situations. Say, we have seen soon after country locked down the situations, all these big retailers, they are helpless. They have not catered to their customers. Even they don't have any plans since they are stuck with their IT platforms and all. See, all we helpless. We are waiting for that. But emerging innovative individuals came up and they supply the products for us to survive for, give us for daily essentials. Otherwise we can't survive. After one or 2 weeks only big companies they can cater to. This I see mainly because of the attitudes of the people who are working for large companies. The individual who are working for themselves, they have to survive. They came with the new ideas. All these grocery shops, they try to deliver their stuff from around their villages, but others not. But in these situations, as a challenge, we have big challenge to restart our businesses. Since we are struggling with everything. So what I did, we silently shut down our operations 1 or 2 days. We closely overlook what is the government feedback, health authorities guidelines, because this is new to the world as well as for the Sri Lankan context. So what we did, we analyzed the China, Korea and Japan, how they address the problem. We get the informations and we try to map all these things to our industries. From this point of view, we spoke with our teams. Then emerging leaders came from our employees, and we used to use digital media and Facebook and WhatsApp, those kind of platform to do the advertising than the traditional media. We changed our transport mode. We used to use public transport to transport our employees, but we changed the transport mode. We encourage people who are working for our industries to come with their own vehicles, and we provided 25% of the employee for company-owned vehicles. And we changed physical meeting to Zoom and Team, and we encourage cash businesses than the credit businesses. As explained by Bertrand, we had big cash flow issues. Since we have given, say, for example, average 45 days credits, soon after, shut down the country, it extended up to additional 60 days, altogether more than 90 days. As Bertrand explains, idea companies are falling into very, very big problem because they don't have cash. Every companies, they are not maintaining the cash, liquid cash. They have current asset, that's stock and debtors. So we have to collect the money to start our cycle. As a company, as an organization, we have challenges. The supply challenges. Suppliers, they are pushing us to get their payments, since that automatically due dates come soon after 45 or 60 days, as agreed with the foreign suppliers. Some shipment has delayed due to shipment arrangement and suppliers delays. Also, some shipment came into the Sri Lankan port and they are struggling to clear the stock due to short of their staff. And government red tapes. As you know, lot of products, lot of HS code, lot of categories banned suddenly by the government. So we can't get it, we can't clear it. Nobody knows it. No clear guideline from the governments. So a lot of stuffs, more than 4,000, 6,000 containers stuck in the port. Also, fluctuation in the dollar rate. So we are reluctant to settle our dues since we don't know which rate is for today, which rate is for tomorrow. Those are the supplier side we had challenges. Operational side, since from the day one, we had some orders, we had some requirements, but to cater that market, we have workforce problem, availability of the workforce, and the transport issues, and decision making, and the unavailability of local raw material as well as foreign raw materials, and cash flows, availability of food for our employees, and the delivery problem. Those are the challenges we face during this pandemic situations. Nobody
Great.
knows how to address this, even though we changes the value chain, we changes the work pattern, we changes the way we address, we changes our meetings. All these changes we have done during this period of time.
Great. So from what I understand from both, from talking to both Bertram and Sumit, is clearly cash flow is an issue, and then there are certain regulations that are hindering, and then there are certain shortages of labor due to this situation, and that's restricting the organization. So this is definitely not a comfortable environment for an entrepreneur, for example, or a self-employed person, which is going to be my next question, goes to Sayandhan. So Sayandhan, given that the market is not functioning, the supply side is stuck, the demand, the regulatory, everything has really pressed the entrepreneur to his or her limits. How do you see them responding to this situation? Because entrepreneur immediate, they are an asset to a nation, any nation. So the way they react will decide a lot of things. So how do you think they are coping up with this current, threatening environment, a scary environment?
Oshan, if you see, our entrepreneurs are used to floods, or they got little impacts like the Easter attack, and they had little things and they came back. But this time, the impact is from a virus which is not visible to a naked eye, which shook the whole world. So this changed the environment of an entrepreneur drastically. Now, if you see the ADB figures, ADB estimates $2 to 4.1 trillion business impact globally. Now, just imagine if that's the business impact, how would that affect an entrepreneur? Now, Bertram spoke of pay cut. For an entrepreneur, it's not pay cut, simply no revenue. I mean, at least when you get a pay cut, you get some sort of money coming into your pocket. At least you can buy your basic stuff. But if you see the calamity of an entrepreneur, there's no revenue. Maybe the few workers he has, there may be variable costs coming down. But we being an independent or an import-dependent nation with dollar going up, unfortunately, the dollar also shot up, the cost went up. So the fixed cost remained, the cost going up. So for an entrepreneur, the profits came down. And worst of all, now you heard the corporate suffered because there were no payment and cash flow for an issue. Just imagine the entrepreneur getting his payment at this time. So, but he has his own debts, because you know, for an entrepreneur, it depends on his funding, and cash flow were a big issue. These were the issues what an entrepreneur underwent. So simply, if I put all together, the first thing what affected the entrepreneur was he was emotionally challenged. So he didn't know what to do. So we saw a lot of panic coming in. So he was simply panicked. We saw a lot of entrepreneurs losing their temper. A lot of stress factors came into them and leading to a lot of frustration. So these were some of the reaction of entrepreneurs. But entrepreneurs are disruptors. Entrepreneurs are innovators. So what did they do? So if I take some examples, how some of the entrepreneurs survived this COVID situation, a good friend of mine who had a salon simply didn't have any clients at all. 1 week, 2 weeks, March ended, how on? So from April, I saw this lady starting an academy and started having classes on the Zoom. So that's something I saw. And today, when things open up, she has a different set of clients coming to her for the good work she did in April. I'll share another example. I know a dental surgeon. I mean, nobody came in for dental procedures during COVID time, and it was all shut down. So he had an empty land where he went into cultivation of fruits and vegetables. So today he says, I'm getting back to my dental surgery, plus I have another income coming from vegetable and fruits, which I would have never thought of if not for COVID. Then I have a person handling garments. So garment factory, he does only the t-shirts and he targets the New Year time to sell them. Now, he had the t-shirts in place, but he could not sell that at all. I mean, it's all stuck in his warehouse. He didn't know what to do, but then he immediately identified with the mass demand coming in. See how an entrepreneur did. He didn't have the 3-ply, or he didn't have the materials for KN94, N95. No, he simply used the cloth that he had, because he knows there is a market for cloth masks. He started stitching them and he started marketing them, and he managed his survival. If I take another example, which should be my last example, I saw the retailers, when the shops were closed, they used the village 3-wheelers and started delivering items to the villager, the houses close by. So these were some of the survival strategies adopted by entrepreneurs. I would say quite innovative, largely survival strategies. And this is what the entrepreneur did, Oshan, during the tough times. So that would be my answer, how they managed the COVID situation.
Great. So from what I understood, despite of all the problems, entrepreneurs were still creative enough to think differently and come up with alternative ways of bringing in revenue, even though it might not be the ideal revenue for them. They found some avenue to bring revenue into their businesses to survive the day. But my next question goes to Dushi. Dushi, the true disruption comes at a lower cost, right? If you take platforms like apps like Uber, a very good example for a low cost disruption. So what sort of low cost disruptions you think that Sri Lankan retailers are currently embracing? Do you see any tendency towards a low cost disruption in retail sector? Do you see an opportunity there in the current context?
So John, so when I'll start by saying this, right? So Sri Lanka has a population of about 21 million. I'll just put things in context. So a population of 21 million. We have nearly 10 million internet users, right? And our mobile connections are about 30 million, over 148%, because we have two SIMs and so on and so forth, right? So the underlying, and we have about like almost 6 million users on Facebook and so on, right? So these are like, so what I'm trying to say is half of the country is anyway connected, right? On some form or the other. We have a banked population about almost 75 to 80%. We can debate about how they're using the banking facility and so on. But the fact is that this is the current situation, right? So you asked me whether I see any low-cost innovation, right? And I am actually, I must say that it's very disappointing. It's very, very, very disappointing that even the largest modern trade retailers couldn't, their knowledge systems were not working. They were limiting themselves for delivery. I have a personal experience. When I ordered, they couldn't even accept a payment from a credit or debit card, right? It's actually, in fact, it's pathetic, right? Now, if you ask why, it's for me, this is about complacency, and it's about not adapting. So we were so comfortable, people coming into shops and buying things. We were so complacent, and whoever who was leading the technology department, and more than that, the leadership was complacent in looking ahead. They were not even preparing for 5 years ahead of, or 3 years ahead of time, right? Now, actually, so that's the side of adoption, I would say. And again, if you talk about the current pandemic and the crisis, right? For me, crisis is a really good thing, because you learn from crisis and you innovate in crisis and you do better things after the crisis, right? For instance, the human or the Homo sapien developed an atom bomb during the Second World War. If not the Second World War, it would have taken another 15-20 years to really play with nuclear energy, right? I'm just an example. There are many other examples, right? So the idea here is that we should not. I would be not pessimistic, and I would be rather optimistic on seeing how you redo things, right? For instance, the idea of resource scarcity is a very old idea, right? If you really look at how other people work, or how the modern, how the future is going to be, people work on the assumption of resource abundance, right? If you look at a retailer, a larger retailer who has like 300 outlets or 400 outlets, they are bound by their assets and they have a very heavy burden. Whereas a small player who just has an app, who has a rented place to put his stock or put the stuff in his house, who has a very linear operation, right? Now, I think the what I am seeing that is lacking is that we the leadership or the retail leadership lacks that vision of how do you make use of this pandemic situation. I'll give another example. After the tsunami, 2004-5 tsunami, we went and laid and when the southern coast railway track was completely destroyed, when we got money, what we did, we went and reinstalled the same type of railway track to southern line, whereas we could have probably modernized the railway, right? And we didn't do it. And I hope and pray that I don't see a similar mistake in the retail sector this time, and they really will understand that there is changes in the society, technology landscape is changing, there is very serious competition coming from outside. You can hold them back for a little period by regulation, but they are going to break in, right? You can already see how people buy at least the electronic stuff, the electronic gadgets, a lot of things online already through Daraz on Amazon or eBay, right? You can easily see this. Now, I see this, even simple things like sporting goods, people now buy from eBay and Daraz, and and they avoid going into local retail because the price is cheaper and you get the stuff, and sometimes things are missing locally. So what I'm trying to say is, if you don't now really be smart enough to relook at what we have done all this time, and look at how the world is changing in the next 3 to 5 years, and if you don't reimagine and use technology as to become a lean and mean operation, I think we have a challenge in our hands. And as Bertram said, we have a huge challenge, there's no doubt. But I think we should talk about how we overcome this, and not to sit and worry about it. I think there are many solutions. There will be many entrepreneurs who will do new things. That's my view, Oshan.
Great. So from listening to all of you, despite the issues, people have thought differently. They have found different channels to anyhow supply goods. So these are the positives that we can take out of this pandemic. And somehow the home deliveries happened. It was never there. So it actually happened. So people did go an extra mile to change. But at the same time, so the complacency was there among people. So these are the takeouts that I see mainly coming from you. And despite the cash flow issues, all of these other issues that we have, we could have been a little bit more proactive and innovative. Things could have been better is the take home. I just could take so far by looking at the conversation. But moving on to my next question, goes to Bertram, right? So now we understand that it's a tight corner that retail is right now in. Despite us being in a tight corner, how do you see organizations now? In one instances, Dushi told that some of the leading online retailers didn't have the technological provisions to operate on electronic platforms. So that was one of the points he made. So likewise, we've been, Sayandhan said, we've been complacent. So looking at this, isn't there anything that we can do to innovate the market, Bertram? What are your thoughts on future?
Yeah, thanks, Oshan. So I do agree with Dushi in the sense that companies haven't certainly been far thinking, and that is certainly unfortunate, right? But so if you really look at it, I think one of the key things that companies have to take from this and learn and do better is the whole thing of planning ahead, right? Even if you look at the companies that actually cope better with the pandemic situation, it was mainly those who had BCPs in place, business continuity plans. Those companies, the multinationals, the larger blue chips, were able to activate those BCPs, and they had some level of readiness. even though this particular scenario was not really, thought out. Companies that didn't even have those had a huge gap to really, catch up. So, so that is something that they certainly need to look at. I will not go into, the practical difficulties, because I do know that, the COVID situation, there were issues with, suppliers and what shall I say, suppliers to the suppliers, were not operating, and even the supermarkets had major issues in, getting goods. So those are some of the practical limitations they face. But in terms of, addressing and moving ahead, I think it's absolutely important that companies have cross-functional teams, because that's one of the learnings from this pandemic. Because you needed teams to work together. You needed people to come together from different functions, work together to ensure agility in business. There were rapid changes in demand. There were certain new categories where the demand went through the roof, like sanitizers and ventilators and so on. And then there were other areas where demand actually crashed. So how do you cope with it? How do you manage your inventory? How do you manage your working capital? So there was a need for cross-functional teams to come together. There was a need for a quick change in business models. You saw that with the modern trade retailers. From a brick and mortar, they had to quickly move to a phone, online, WhatsApp, ordering model and delivery. So that was called for. The other thing I think we can learn from the whole pandemic situation is the need for collaboration and strategic alliances, particularly on the last mile delivery. Now, that is something that companies had to really cope with. Cargills, I think, even though there's a lot of criticism, at least if you look at the way they move, they tied up with PickMe and they worked with Uber, and they tried to work on at least the last mile delivery. So it happened to an extent. And I think in terms of how you address this going forward, it's absolutely important that you have disciplined practices and policies in place during the good times, which will stand you in good stead when things start going south. I mean, simple example, companies that were offering 90 days credit to the trade, I can tell you are currently still languishing, unable to collect the debts for goods sold in January, right? Because 90 days from January goes to March onwards there was lockdown. So even in June, they're still struggling to collect debts of January. So companies that had strict credit policies, which said, maximum we will do, 30 days or 14 days or whatever, were certainly in a much better situation. The other one that we actually found was, another example would be, say, companies who operated without bank guarantees. They were exposed immediately. So you need to limit those exposures. So the good practice and disciplined practices are really required, which will stand you in good stead. Simple things like, having a strong MIS on receivables. It's absolutely vital that you have visibility into your receivables. Right at this point, I can tell you there are some companies who are struggling with it because they didn't have that, right? Simple things like, having bank transfers, getting your customers to do payments via bank transfers rather than the traditional check collection. During the lockdown, you found that, companies that were relying on collecting checks and banking, they couldn't do that. There was curfew, courier companies were closed, so you couldn't do that. Companies who had bank transfer mechanisms were still able to operate and get their payments going. The other thing I see in terms of changes is that there is a strong consumer concern for health and safety. It's for your employees as well as customers, right? So the whole opportunity to get into, contactless checkouts in supermarkets, we see it in the West. We don't see it enough here. So those are areas they can get into. Even things like contactless payment options. We know that Visa has that option. But, consumers are concerned about these things. So these are areas that, retailers can probably get into fairly quickly. The other thing that I think needs to be looked at is we know that there is going to be a very tough situation with reduction of consumption, reduction of disposable income. So how do companies cope with that? So there is a need to relook at your CVP, your customer value proposition. There is a need to probably relook at your go-to-market strategy. How do you actually do that? Omni-channel retail is absolutely required. I don't think there's any way around it, right? So those are things that retailers have to look at in terms of trying to address the so-called new normal. And I think the whole thing about trying to move beyond your core domain capabilities. If you are strong in brick and mortar retailing, that's not going to stand you in good stead going forward, right? So you need to have the logistics, you need to have the e-commerce, or at least collaborate and work with parties who can bring that strength to you. And I think the other key thing that is really required going forward is a continuous risk assessment. Companies talk of risk grid and they keep doing all of these things, but do they really ask the tough questions, right? That's what really needs to be looked at. For example, in this current situation, we found that concepts such as just-in-time inventory, concepts such as rationalizing supply chains and single sourcing, those have all been severely challenged due to the pandemic situation, right? So these are things they need to look at. Assess not only the risk of your supply chain, but the supply chain to your supply chain. Your outsourced suppliers and who supplies them. These are things that need to be looked at. So again, there is a need to plan ahead. There is a need to rethink CVPs, to look at the go-to-market model, and only then, as I think Dushi also touched on, you need to think so many steps ahead, plan for the different scenarios so that you will be prepared when it actually hits you.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Bertram. So from what I understood by listening to you is that if now organizations are forced to bring in cross-functional teams who can face the uncertainty, they need to assess their risks and evaluate their options, revisit how they work. So how do you see such things being such initiatives? What sort of initiatives do you think, Sumit, for instance, organizations will adopt for tomorrow with your personal experience?
Roshan, what I see now, soon after this kind of turbulence and economics downturn, so company will turn around in a big way. That's my experience with the innovations and kind of best manufacturing practices. But I want to highlight, so this kind of situation we experience that our competitor or our challenges will not come with the known way. It's come from the different way. So it's come from the different planets. But I mean, not from the existing environment, not from the existing competitors. So we have to ready to address this. Sometimes we don't have any strategies to meet these kind of challenges, even though we need to have a contingency plan to meet this kind of thing, this kind of situations. We need to assess our risk. And I can recommend, I can tell you 2-3 steps how we need to get in future. In this situation, we experience that if we have good communications, good information system from the suppliers and manufacturers, like other company have Toyota and Apple. Once they start the production, that incorporate with the suppliers system, then we can get the information. From that information, we can plan, we can adjust our manufacturing facilities, manufacturing plan. So that is that's a question I putting into Dushi. He will address this. How we can have supplier manufacturing information system. Also, I wish to propose creative system manufacturer supply information system. Manufacturer customer information system. Since if we have this kind of information systems, manufacturers, customers, maybe distributor or dealer, retailer. If we have retailer informations, we can have information, we can map through the distributor, then manufacturer. We know their stock situation and all, then we can plan our manufacturer and we can pass that information on supplier. The day customer buy the products, that information will go past to our supplier ordering part. Then fully system should be automated. Also, this kind of pandemic situations, we need to use our dynamic capabilities. So some companies like Ford, they do have same kind of machineries, same kind of production process to convert immediately to the any other complex product like hospital bed. These situations, other countries, they do have big demand for hospital bed. That means we have to have used our dynamic capabilities. I have seen in Sri Lanka even some paint companies. This situation, we can't sell the paint. You know what they did? They have mixes, they have chemicals, they used to manufacture hand sanitizers. It is available in the market. For that products, we have good demand. Those are the strategies we can use. Also, we learn a lot of things due to these pandemic situations. It's a country like Europe and Australia. 50% of their employees are variables, not fixed. The situation faced that suddenly they stop the productions, their fixed overhead cost is very less. Not like our country. As a country, 95% of our overhead, fixed overhead like labor, is fixed. The people in those countries, they are fight with their government to go their work, to get the income. Since if they are not going to their workplace, they are not getting the money. As a country, see what happened to our people, even though our government person, even our private sector, some big companies, people who are in 2 months at the home, they are not encouraged to go to the work. Since they know they have fixed income. We have learned that kind of things. That means everything, if possible, as an entrepreneur, as an organization, should be variables. Then we can mitigate our risk factors. Whatever the problems come, we can face, we can reduce, we can mitigate our losses. That's what I recommend.
Great. So from what I understand, moving forwards, what Sumit is proposing is to keep the fixed cost to a bare minimum, while variable costs can be brought to the forefront. So that way, for example, if I may put to a practice, performance-based incentives can have a greater weightage than the fixed salary, for example. So those are things that moving forwards, entrepreneurs can give a thought to. And with that point, in addition to that, Sayandhan, what do you think entrepreneurs should do? In addition to that, what should they do right now to capitalize on this? Even though this is a threat, this is an opportunity for an entrepreneur. In this opportunity, what should Sri Lankan retail entrepreneurs do? This includes the hires to the the self-employed person in manning market, for example.
Okay. Okay. So Oshan, I would first of all say there is a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs itself. So all the young students, all the budding people, tomorrow when you go to the job market, don't sit and cry, there's no job, don't go to the streets and protest. There's a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurship. That would be my first statement. So go ahead and think well, do something creative, do something innovative. There's a lot of opportunities coming in. As you said, for the entrepreneurs who are big or who fall into the SME category, my first advice is be prepared. Because this hit us, a lot of things we were not prepared. Now we are learning, and sometimes we are learning the hard way. So it's the biggest thing, be prepared. And also we should have the mental capacity. Earlier, since I mentioned of stress and frustration and temper, all that, I think we should have the mental capacity, increase the emotional quotient, better known as EQ, to stay strong. We need to think positive. We need to believe in oneself, especially from an entrepreneur point of view. And I think we need to change and adapt ourselves to the new normal. From a business point of view, it's going to be the new business environment. So we can't expect and go back and say, expect the same things to happen. So we need to adapt ourselves. So entrepreneur need to look at or relook at, I would say, at the revenue structure and the cost structure, because this is going to change and this is what's going to change your business model. So when you change, when I say you need to relook at the revenue or the cost structure, sometimes that taken for granted customer, I think you need to look at who is your customer, who is the segment, and who is your target market. Okay, by default you would have got the sales, but go back, think who is that customer who brings your sale, and who is the target market I am positioning my product. We need to rekindle relationship. Something I saw during the COVID time also, some people didn't keep silent. They kept connected to the customer. So we need to have that relationship, and that's something, it's a big element. Sometimes we take it for granted. Be it the supplier, be it the customer, work on those relationships. I feel it's a big factor sometimes we ignore in doing business. We need to relook at the channels, because COVID-19 had made some of the intermediary totally taken out. Some of the intermediaries are disrupted. So see whether you can use, I'm sure Dushi will shed a lot of light on online, whether we can go direct to the customer. So relook at your channels, how to reach your customer. I would always say, don't sell no frills product. Always differentiate and offer value to the customer. So if you are a person, if you are selling product, see that in a manner whether your target audience, that you are selling the most wanted product that you want. Or if you are in services, are you offering a service that the customer that most wanted? So this would be my little bit of advice from an entrepreneur's point of view, because I always believe entrepreneurs are fighters, entrepreneurs are optimistic, and entrepreneurs are resilient. So hence, I don't see anything going wrong for entrepreneurs. They will be always successful. That will be my remark, Oshan.
Yes, thanks a lot, Sayandhan. So it's interesting. So it's not that none of these experts are reluctant to try new things. They're all willing to, and they're searching for that next big opportunity, the X factor to take their business to the next level. And what's clear is the entire market dynamics, the market structure, the way we operate is changing. Now my next question is in line with that to Dushi. Dushi, times have changed, channels are changing. Do you think, for example, a country like Sri Lanka has sufficient resources to strengthen the alternative channels, and how would they do that in future?
Well, of course we have the resources. It's just we lack the imagination and the will to implement, right? I mean, it's a simple. That's a very simple answer to your question. So there are a few things that I want to touch with about what from my friend Sumit said, and from what Bertram said. And so Sumit asked a question about how do you have visibility into your supply chain, right? So yeah, I'll give a practical example. If you look at, I'm sorry to bring this, but if you look at how Apple works, right? Apple has complete visibility into from where they source the microchip, the whole production line, and the sales, right? Now, what I want to emphasize here is that Apple's core strength is actually manufacturing. It's a core component of their value chain. Yet it's outsourced to Foxconn. The idea here is that it's about looking at the whole value chain and mapping it, and you understand where the profit pools are, and you playing the right role in that, right? That's the whole point here. And there are systems available already to automate this whole process. You can give you complete visibility. That's the answer to Sumit. So in terms of what's going to happen, right? How do we do this, or whether we have resources? I think we really have plenty of resources. I am a strong believer we are completely curtailed by our thinking and the way we want to do things, right? So if you look at what happened during the COVID, or what we are even talking, we should not be we're talking about online. We're talking about online sales, right? But what we need to talk about is digital experience, right? So we are almost at the verge. We are almost entering the fourth industrial revolution. We should connect this crisis so that we actually actively enter the revolution with a different digital mindset. We are not talking about digital customer experience here, right? It's not about online. It's about how a customer experience your solution or your product or service in a digital manner. So that needs a lot of reimagination and reconfiguration of your business. If you go to China or especially Southeast Asia, the way a product is sold is actually very different on a mobile. It's a very different experience to what you see generally. I can actually draw an example. It's not about the product; it's about the consumption, right? So Amazon, it's a failed product, but Amazon, what they did was they had a button next to a washing machine. If you run out of your liquid, you press, within a few hours you get the liquid delivered to your doorstep, right? So they actually tried to reimagine how a person will consume the detergent, right? So the idea this is a story to stir your thinking in how you reimagine your engagement with your customer. It's not about digitizing, or it's not about automating your current processes into an online form. It will not help at all. It needs to be about a complete reimagination of how you work, right? And we also need to understand the generational shift that is happening, and that needs to be taken into consideration, right? You need to understand that we are moving into a world of, I don't know, excess availability. People will not buy new cars anymore. The ownership, the idea of ownership is actually kind of quite old, right? It's clear if you really look at it. Our leaders need to understand how you go into a shared model, and even with last mile connectivity, the challenges he had. There are already, I know, companies who are actually trying to solve that problem. You can partner with them. Actually, you need to reimagine the whole ecosystem, how you reach your consumer. That's actually the point. You cannot only automate yourself, or you should not digitize yourself and expect things to happen. You need to actually look forward and backward, and you need to look at how you reimagine and digitize the whole ecosystem. And if you don't do that, well, we have a problem, and you're actually setting up yourself for failure. Plus, you're actually also going to let the local commerce guys to come and sort of kill the larger players, right? And I think the local retailers need to really sit and relook at the threat that is coming from players like Daraz, who are backed by Alibaba, who have very long pockets, who know the game very well, and the very lean model. It's going to be a huge challenge for the large retailers who have very large asset base, and who really are hanging on to that. So that's my thought. So the answer to your question, yes, we do have a lot of resources, and I do strongly feel that the local entrepreneurs should not only look at Sri Lanka, they should actually replicate this model in our neighboring countries who have a much larger population, have a much larger economy. That's my view.
Great. So listening to you all, what's coming clear is, now, if you look at the pure management line of thought, bringing the fixed cost down, increasing the variable cost, those were like the thinking that was coming. And then from entrepreneurial angle, think differently. From innovations angle, reimagination. So these were the key outcomes that came out of the conversation. So, and I'm getting a lot of questions from the audience. So I would like to take this opportunity to also bring about a few questions posed by the audience. One of them have asked whether the full-time management professionals in time to come would turn into part-time entrepreneurs. And this question goes to Sayandhan. Do you think it'll happen?
I would say, see, I think in being in Sri Lanka, this environment, we are lucky, Oshan. But if you see, I was told in US in just 15 days, some 10 million odd people lost the job. And there's a lot of job being lost. I feel the trend is changing, the market is changing. Yes, there's a lot of opportunities, and I would say wear that entrepreneurial hat. And even if you're working in an organization, be an entrepreneur. And if you think that way, yes, I think time to come. I would say we would have the knowledge worker concept, a person would be permanent in many places. I don't think a person would be glued to one permanent place. Now, see, I work for an organization. I'm glued in that place. I work only for 10 years. Future, the job market may change where I may offer my services to 3 or 4 partners, where I may become temporary. Yes, the job market too will change, and I would say they would partially become entrepreneurs, will be my view. Where in the entrepreneur hat, Toshan.
Cheers. I think that's a very straightforward. I hope the audience got the direct answer from the boss's mouth. So the next question is from the audience again. They're saying shouldn't not everyone can afford to innovate in a big way. Should the government support small to medium enterprises to bring about innovation? And for instance, if you take a context like PETA market, the traders there, should they be assisted with some sort of technology? Is there a technology that they can use is there a technology that the government can offer them, is the question that they are asking. I think best answered by Dushi. Do you think government can go for a collaborated model to present to them?
Okay, so let me answer this way, right? I have actually kind of two views on this. Yes, you need a certain amount of government support for the future industries, but not for industries that are already dying. Okay, so this is my problem. You don't go and support an industry or an environment which is actually having its last gasp. No, right? So, for example, if you look at the industry of fossil fuel-based cars, if you're going to put money into them and trying to protect them in 2020, I think you're stupid, right? That's not the case. You need to look at then the government. If there's going to be government support, then the government needs to look at investing or protecting industries that are forward-looking, right? Who are actually looking into electric cars. I'm just giving a crude example here, right? The same thing. If you look at the way PETA has operated, or if you ask specific question about PETA, right? See, PETA is almost like 100 years old, right? And it is bound to be disrupted. It's bound to change. So, unless the merchants there really, they need to rethink how they fit into the current environment. Of course, they are playing a role at this point of time, but I wonder whether they'll play the same role in another 5 years' time. Right? So we need to so the government's decision probably should be looking at the future and not trying to protect the current environment, so that we should not be dragged back by protecting an industry which is not viable in the future. This is my answer. I could be wrong, but this is my answer.
To basically invest at the right place. That's what we are trying to say. Yeah. So I think the next question is also in terms of it comes from I think this can be answered by Sumit, I feel. Do you think large companies should have a reserve for business continuity in case of a crisis? I know business continuity management is practiced in some of the large scale companies, but should all organizations consider a reserve fund allocation to face a crisis?
Oshan, can you say again? I can't hear you.
Yeah. So basically, do you think companies moving forward? Yes. Can you hear me?
Oshan, can you say again? I can't hear you.
Yeah. Sure. So, Sumit, do you think organizations should have like a 2 to 3 months reserve fund allocated in the case to utilize in the case of a crisis like this, like a business continuity management plan, a fund?
Oshan, what I want to tell you, as a company, all the times companies try to invest for their future businesses, not for keeping monies, not as a business perspective. All the times, all the organization and small players or big players or SMEs, they all the times they wanted to expand their existing business. They invest the money what they have for the future businesses. keeping such kind of big money at the bank account, so on a temporary basis, that's not the wise recommendation for our point of view, since every single cent is more important for the company, since future growth and future investment. That's my answer.
Great, thank you very much. So there's another question. This is being directed at Dushi. So what's the present trend of entrepreneurs' social media adaptation as a business model in retail sector? That's the question.
Can you come again? I couldn't.
Yeah, what's the present trend of entrepreneurs' social media adaptation in the retail sector? Do you think entrepreneurs are adopting social media enough today?
Okay, so we have 6 million Facebook users. We have nearly about 1 million Instagram users. Of course, if they are not adapting, then we have a problem. Right? And Facebook is allowing businesses to be. In fact, having a website is like really old-fashioned. No, you don't do websites anymore, right? You just create a page on Facebook. You can actually open a storefront on Facebook. You can actually continue your business, even accept payments, right? So I think Facebook recently launched, which is another major threat for the local industries, which is called Facebook Business. And I know there are local banks who want to talk to Facebook to integrate payment systems into Facebook directly, right? So if the local entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs in retail, if social media is not their primary mode of sale, then we do have a challenge. We really do have a challenge, and they need to look forward. Actually, one of the things, Oshan, that I see is that we always say this is Sri Lanka, we don't do this, we go back to the normal self. Well, that's just we are hiding behind fallacy, right? We need to look ahead. If your users are not willing to change, then you need to incentivize them to change. Even in Africa, people do that, right? So I believe that adoption of social networks and it's a significant component of future retail.
Great, so fantastic. So what I understand from listening to you all is, yes, we have a lot of issues related. Immediately we have a set of issues to address. There are cash flow issues, there are legal issues, there are certain red tapes that you need to cut across, there's dollar fluctuation, economical issues, so a lot of social pressure with pay cuts and the society is under stress. So the entire market is needs to be looked at, revisited and rethought of, and then the entrepreneurs should reimagine and according to Sumit, processes should be redesigned in more agile manner. And according to Dushi, if you look at, he says we need to look at where to invest in terms of when it comes to investment, even the organizations and the governments, they really need to see where they should invest. So what all of these put together, what's coming is, yes, we have a problem. Retail industry is at the moment suffering, but there are certain local commerce players coming up. There are certain alternative channels that are gaining popularity. There's a whole mind shift change that has been talked about, and this change is gradually happening. People are accepting, and only if you survive in this change, only you would survive for another few years down the line. But if you don't change, it'll be like the dinosaur. You're just gonna go away from the market, right? So I think from listening to you all and all the panelists, as well as from the questions that I got from the audience, what I understand is that unless you are going to change the way you deal in the new normal, you're not going to fit into new normal. Simple as that. So because of I would love to continue the discussion, but because due to the time limitations, we would have to wrap up this session. However, before we wrap up, on behalf of University of Kelaniya, DBA team. I'd like to thank all our panelists, Mr. Bertram Paul, Sumit Dandunage, Mr. T.Sayandhan, and Mr. Dushi Tilevasan. Thank you very much for coming, accepting the invitation and coming on board to share all your ideas, and also the wonderful audience who've been there from start to finish, asking a lot of questions. Apologize if we couldn't answer some of your questions because there are so many. I think we picked a few that can be answered quickly. I think we covered most of the questions that you posted. So thank you very much for being with us throughout a long 1.5 hour session. So we would like to come up to you with another interesting topic sometime next week. The University of Kelaniya DBA team would be reaching out to you. You will see the communications later, but it's not going to be retail. Retail, we spoke about retail. We need to rethink, reimagine, redo things to survive. Otherwise, we are simply gone. Have a good night. Thank you very much.